Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, and if you're listening on Spotify, welcome back to the S&C Roundtable. We're kicking off this year with a solo podcast, and it is just a presentation of something that I released recently, which was an 8-week power program. And inside there is an ebook which delves into the principles, the philosophies behind the program. It also goes into information about some of the modalities that you're going to be exploring, also some really useful tables for developing mobility, and also some of the weightlifting techniques that I want you guys to be working towards. So if you have the program, you're going to get that resource with it as well. So I think it is the full package. But before we kind of delve into some of those philosophies, I really want to just talk about the program itself, why I think these are some of the most fundamental things that a good weightlifting coach should understand, and what I believe this to be as more so as in the category of assumed knowledge for weightlifters. So I'm going to delve into, there's about 12 slides that I want to work through, and these things I think are just essential for you to understand and will help you design some better weightlifting programs for yourself. So particularly if you've got an athlete who is strong and slow, you want to develop a bit more beastly weightlifting performance, you want to see more overlap between your accessory work and your weightlifting performance, I think this stuff is incredibly important, and it's necessary for the holistic development of a weightlifter, which is something that I think isn't discussed enough. And I think it's the way in which I like to approach strength and conditioning in general, but especially for weightlifters, which have a very monotonous and linear sport where there is minimal variability in the sport itself. So it means we have to draw upon some other ways to develop these qualities our athletes need. So let's get stuck straight into it. If you're listening on Spotify, there is a visual component to this, but if you can feel free to listen along as well. We'll start with why power. So why power program, or why do I believe that power is a rate limiter for athletes? Well, I want to start with the fact that most people might have heard of a power phase. If you've been in weightlifting circles for some time, you might have heard coaches talk about giving athletes power programs, or them starting with a power phase immediately after competition. And I believe that these programs just make you slower. These are a bit of a misnomer. What they actually do is build a bit of capacity. They may develop skill to some extent if you're relatively inexperienced, but skill, I believe, is necessary at heavier intensities. So the ability for you to improve the technique that you express at 90% plus is probably more important to me than your technique that you express at 70% or 65% from doing volume work. So in this typical power phase, you're going to be exposed to things like 5x5 on pulls and squats, and volume Olympic lifts, triple clean and jerks, fives on snatches if you were fortunate or unfortunate enough to experience that with me. But the slower bar velocities in general they do not lead to power development. It ends up being more strength work. It ends up being, I wouldn't even say it's general preparation, because it's only really developing and doubling down on weightlifting exposure, and I don't think it's done intelligently enough to really be a strength program or a conditioning program to prepare you for higher volumes of weightlifting work. Typically, they end up coming in after a competition phase. So after a comp, you will swing back to volume, and that's not at all how I like to program, but it is how many others do. And especially when you come from a competition, you have to imagine you've just been completing relatively little volume, but relatively high intensity as a general rule. And when you step into something like this, your outputs and your ability to perform or elicit a high stimulus in one rep is extremely high. So you're going to take that into, or this skill of eliciting in high intensity into fives, and that just leads to burnout and overuse injuries. Your ability to express high forces is quite high, and expressing that into pretty much 10xing the volume, it needs to be done more slowly and more intelligently. But if you dive straight into something like this, I think it typically leads to burnout and injury. So in this program, we'll really want to try and develop power and improve rate of force development for athletes. And we're going to be doing that through a variety of stresses, not just through weightlifting alone. And when we're prescribing weightlifting, trying to have higher bar velocities, trying to focus on picking intensity or load selections that allow you to express weightlifting without just dragging the bar up the body, trying to use the weightlifting exercises with high intent and high quality, opposed to just spamming high volume lifts and potentially getting injured and then not developing any power at all. Just maybe improving some skill at lighter intensities and just getting a strength stimulus, or a very low one at least. I believe that high rate of force development, so coming back to why I think power is a rate limiter for performance for weightlifters. So in order to express weightlifting form correctly, so in order to have a very powerful second pull, in order to maximize your output, your strength output, and convert that into a very powerful jerk, dip, and drive, and be explosive in general, get under the bar fast, pull yourself under, move in and out of positions quite quickly. That is you need the substance of high rate of force development. If you do not have high rate of force development, if you're not very athletic, however you want to describe it, if you do not have much power, much juice, then you're not going to be able to express weightlifting form correctly. So if we think about any examples, you've seen Werner Gunther, you've seen shot putters, throwers, you've seen Vedder, javelin thrower, sprinters, all being able to express extremely high forces, and then it's no surprise that they're very good at weightlifting. So instead of doubling down as much on thinking about how we can express more skill, extract more technique out of the person, and therefore maybe milk out these imaginary numbers out of them just by doubling down on technique and skill, we want to focus more on the raw physical outputs and how can we make them more of a beast. And as a result, the training is quite pure. There is a lot of truth to it. You're not going to be performing any fluff work. You're just going to be working hard and performing really good training. So we're going to get into what that looks like and how that's going to be structured. But those are some of the big keys to kind of start off why we're focusing on this as a quality. Boo Shucksnader is someone else who I've taken inspiration from this program, along with some other people that I've been talking with online. Some of my friends, Zach Kangonis, and Jack Edwards, have been all really important in developing this program and going back and forth with them and using some of their knowledge and just helping me refine my ideas. But Boo Shucksnader has a really good point, and it's from an article that he's written, and this quote talks about how the first step is obviously making power and speed a priority in the program. So if that's not a priority, then you're not going to be developing that quality, and it's not going to be developed as effectively. And many coaches claim to develop power, as we've just seen with the 5x5 power program. That's not really one, and they try and sacrifice these things to achieve gains in other areas that are not necessarily as critical and more easily repaired if underdone. So if you underdose hypertrophy, it's quite easy to repair that. If you underdose strength work, you just need another exposure. If you do not program power correctly, you will not develop power at all. You will I see weightlifters who, if they're not performing, if they're not jumping, if they don't have these other modalities in their programs, if they don't have single effort jumps, if they don't have throws, if they don't have these different variations, if their program is very linear, then those are the adaptations that they'll get. They won't get a variety. They don't have a variety of stresses in their program to create these adaptations. So I think it's something worth noting and worth diving into and investing in your athletes for long-term success. One of the biggest training philosophies, or one of the biggest driving philosophies of the program, is this form versus substance from Mladen Janovic in his program, in his eBook or his book, Strength Training Manual, and to a greater extent in HIT Manual as well. I'd recommend you guys check those out. But essentially you have this concept called form and substance. So he talks about it, and I talk about it also in the 8-week program, about how we have a shot putter who wants to throw over 20 meters, and that is the form. You have the experiences, the technical model of a shot putter, and obviously, competition day experiences and the nuances of that is expressed in form. And then the things that underpin that is your substance. So the ability in the case of a shot putter to incline press 200 kilos. If you do not incline press very heavy, say you incline press 80 kilos, then chances are, 60 kilos, you're probably not going to throw a 7 kilogram shot put very far. You don't have the physical capacity to actually begin to express the technical model to that extent. If you are a weightlifter and you want to snatch over body weight, say you want to snatch double body weight, for example, as a male, you're a 75 kilo guy, you want to snatch 150, and that is weightlifting at a very high performance. If you cannot squat 3 times body weight, if you cannot squat 250 kilos and you want to clean 180 or 220, then you're at a loss. That you're going to be working from a place, that goal is too great for you to achieve. So you need to develop more in the substance. With weightlifting, looking at substance and form, we know you might have heard of you need to front squat your 3 RM. So in order to clean a 1 RM, or in order to clean a certain weight, it helps to have front squatted it for a 3 or 5 RM. If we apply form and substance, we can look at it in that more reductionist way. I think the best way to look at form and substance for weightlifters to really have this holistic development is to think about substance as all of the physical qualities and traits that an athlete needs in that sport. So in weightlifting, power, speed, mobility, skill, the ability to express power in different contexts, and how we can then transfer those to form. And then between those two areas, between the gap between these two images on screen, we obviously have the overlapping performance. If we can increase substance to a greater extent, to a meaningful enough size, then we're going to see an increase in the overlapping performance between these two. So if an athlete comes to us, and typically with weightlifters, they'll come to us with form that is enormous. They have been working on form with a very hyper-specific approach for years and years, and they have the substance of an athlete who is almost untrained. We get them to do plyometrics, very uncoordinated, deep tier work with Matt Watson, unable to move in and out of deep ranges, have never really prioritized strength to a greater extent, have never really trained power to a greater extent either. If we can focus more on these two things holistically, we're going to see a greater increase in this overall performance. So the athlete that I have on the left here is one of my athletes, Zoe, and she's competing in her first international weightlifting comp representing Australia. And a lot of the gains from her training have come from developing more on the substance side, being more of a beast, having a bigger squat, being more powerful, being more explosive, doing more single effort jumps, doing throws, doing some resisted sprints, whether that is a sled push, and developing more on that side of the things rather than investing in areas that are not going to, in areas that they've already invested in quite a bit, which is developing the technical model, which is extremely important. But in order to express a very powerful second pull, in order to have a very powerful drive, you need the substance, and that is a powerful squat, being able to sprint, being able to be explosive, being able to jump very far, and all of those things are essentially the driving force of why we've organized training in this way. Also, variability. The programs that typical weightlifters are exposed to, very high exposure to the main lifts. That is excellent for close to competition. Those are the things you want to work on. As competition comes, things will get more simpler. The things that you want to be developing are going to be just the main two lifts. They're going to be your most important metrics. Average strength work, making sure that your ability to, move the weights that you're wanting to clean. You can squat quite comfortably in your strength work, and then trying to just track the performance of snatch and clean and jerk. And outside of those phases, when we're far from competition or further from competition, it's important to balance a variety of stresses. And this can be done very, very close to competition. I do this anyway, but this is going to just help you with protecting against overuse injuries, boredom, and stale training environments. I've spoken about it before, how obviously if you practice the same skill in the same way, you're going to stress the same tissues in the same way. And that's going to lead to a greater chance of developing an overuse injury. It's going to lead to a greater chance of developing elbow tendonitis, achy elbows, bursitis in the shoulder. It's going to lead to quad tendinopathies, patellar tendinopathies, those things that I think are more easily managed when you have a variety of stresses in the program that help you with load management and help you disperse some of the load through the rest of the body by introducing some variability. So whether that is each week you perform depth jumps, or you perform sprinting, you have an outdoor session, or you just make more frequent changes. You run 2-week training blocks or 3-week training blocks, which are shorter, and see the athlete cycle through more weightlifting variation. So there is a bit of variability in there, because in the sport itself, there is very little. So just changing block heights, changing pulling positions, catch positions are all things that are easy to integrate and have a very high return on investment. And then I've spoken about it before, whether it's on Instagram, whether it's in podcasts or in videos, how the repetitive training essentially dumbs the body down. So it has, at least that's my understanding, and it's less likely to, whether it's elicit skill development and performance in general. So if you have very repetitive training environments, it might be, and you're seeing a plateau. It's not that the training itself, the training model is just overused. You need new stimuli. You need to be stimulated in a different way. And by having some of this variability in the program, it assists with creating a more enjoyable training environment for you to work in. And for whether it's you're a coach watching this or whether you're an athlete yourself, it's just going to help you keep things more fun and interesting, which is going to really hang on to, if you value athlete health and you value athlete enjoyment. These things are all tied together. So I've also spoken about things like differential learning, and Franz Bosch also talks about how variability can overload the sensory motor packages. So it's going to help you with skill development. So I have an image of an athlete on the right-hand side of the screen, just doing a deep forward leap. The ability to train bouncing out of a deep squat, kind of rolling through these positions, living in flexion more comfortably, being more comfortable in a deep squat is going to help you with your ability to bounce out of your cleans. And we've seen that for a lot of athletes, being able to, so many people struggle with how many power more than full videos are there on YouTube, where people really struggle with the ability, as soon as they get under the bar, they just stiffen up. If you can introduce training into the program, or exercise into the program, which are going to help you just fall into these positions more comfortably, it's going to be extremely valuable, and there's going to be a huge return on investment there. So one of the big keys that we're going to be using to just drive these increases in rate of force development are all very simple things, and they are simple because they allow you to elicit a high stimulus, and they don't have much fluff. There's not a lot of complexity to these movements. I suppose there's complexity behind the technical models, but there's not complexity in the fact that you're running on a Bosu ball. There's no gimmicks. There's no fluff, I should say. So we've got weightlifting variations. There's 2 that I want to delve into, and there's obviously more inside the program. Resisted sprinting variations, single effort jumps and throwing, and then plyometrics. We're going to delve into some of these now and how they're going to be very useful for the holistic development of a weightlifter. So block variations are probably one of my most favorite variation to use in the program and into athletes' programs in general, because you'd be surprised how many people haven't actually done a block variation. They haven't used them before. They've done hang power cleans, but a block variation feels very different. So essentially, you don't have pre-tension like you would when you're holding the bar in a hang position, and you don't have the momentum that's generated from the floor in the blocks. So you have to build tension from this block height, which you can manipulate. And as a result, it's a lot easier for people to sit comfortably in the start position where they're not holding the weight and getting fatigued from doing that. So it's a really good teaching tool. So this is why I've integrated into the program, because I think it's an awesome place for all experience levels to start, whether you're an advanced weightlifter or whether you're just getting started and this is your first experience. So it's easy to teach the postures, nice and tall positions at the start of the pull. I'm just going to play this video now so you guys can see that. So really easy to Get comfortable in the start position with your hips low and getting your chest up, getting a nice long spine, working on the postures that you need at the start to keep the bar close. And then it requires you, in order to get this bar to fly up your body, you're going to have to create a violent second pull. You're going to have to create a very powerful hip extension as you sweep the bar in. And this example is a block power snatch, and how you'll keep the knees bent, you'll sweep the bar in towards the hips, and you'll explode the bar off the thighs. And then the bar is going to fly up. So I think another reason why, if we're trying to focus on power development and we're trying to see a greater transfer to weightlifting, one of the most simple and effective rationales, I think, for using blocks is just the fact that you can accumulate more repetitions. So if I just had people pump out reps from the ground, regardless if it's in an EMOM, regardless of how the program's structured, but there's obviously going to be this fatigue component to a greater range of motion. The fact that we're just deleting the first pull and we're starting with the bar at the knees, we're able to accumulate more reps, and that's just going to result in more time for transfer of the power that we're trying to develop, and then more time to develop the techniques that we need. So if an athlete struggles to make contact, they struggle to use their hip, they struggle to create a very powerful dive under the bar, and they struggle to pull themselves under the bar, and just lack speed almost everywhere, then blocks are an easy way to do that, but you're also going to be able to accumulate more reps here as well. Snatch pull with a dip. The video that I have is probably not the best example of a snatch pull with a dip because it's only 40 kilos. And I think a snatch pull with a dip is done more justice when the weight is closer towards maximal intensities, also done off the blocks as well. So you can overload that position. But for the sake of this, you'll understand that you need to dip under the weight and keep the elbows high and pull yourself under violently. And the only way to do that is if you do the pull with high intent. So essentially, you may have seen videos online where someone might, and my coach has done this, I do this to my clients, I stand with a broomstick and I hold the broomstick straight out in front of them, and so that the broomstick is going to hit the side of the barbell where the sleeves are. And I hold the broomstick at the height of their overhead squat position. So if you want to do this with your athletes, just get them to go into an overhead squat, find the height, and then say to them, cool, I'm going to grab the broomstick, I'm going to hold it at that height, might be like 1 point something meters off the ground, and you're just going to hold it there, and their goal is to let the bar hit the broomstick. So an easy way to get more of an external cue, to create more of a sense of urgency in pulling under the bar, creates more intent, also gives them something tactile because they'll hear whether or not they hit the stick or not. So it gives them something to reach for. But in a snatch pull with a dip, I'll play the video so you guys can see that. You're going to almost think about jumping. You're going to think about popping the bar off the hips. The bar is going to fly up, and you're going to keep the elbows high as you dip. We don't want the elbows coming back too much. We want to try and keep the elbows high so that we can keep the bar close. If the way you perform pulls is quite slow, then that's going to give you a good indication of the adaptations that you're going to achieve from your pulls. So if your pulls are very slow, they lack intent, then you can expect those sorts of adaptations. You're going to see similar adaptations to just strength training, regular old strength training. So if you want to merge the two things together, if you want to create a high intensity environment for your pulls, snatch pull with a dip, or a panda pull as it's sometimes referred to as, and a lot of people have heard of these variations but just haven't integrated them and haven't tried them. And I think they're a really good way for you to bridge some of that, converting some of that strength to power and then to your Olympic lifts. So that's something that I think needs to be said. If the training is going to develop power, then it needs to be done at high intent, and you're going to adapt from those slower velocities, which is not what we want when our goal is to be more of a beast. Sprinting variations and resisted sprints. This is the next thing I want to discuss. These exercises are going to far exceed the velocity requirement of weightlifting. So in weightlifting, you're going to see bar speeds of around 2 meters a second, 1.8 to 2 meters a second. In sprinting, you're going to see far quicker velocities. You're going to be exposed to 4 times that. And how fast the swing leg's coming through, the stretch reflex that you're getting, the stretch shortening cycle that you're getting through your hip flexors, hip extensors to drive yourself forward. This is essential for slow but strong weightlifters. And in the past, I've spoken to coaches And they have integrated these movements into the program. And I would say it's probably done quite poorly in the fact that it's done over far greater distances. And in order to reduce injury, I think you should start with hills or partner resisted with a band around the hip. There's many variations that you can dive into, and variations are given in the program. I think a hill sprint is an awesome place to start as far as getting the more horizontal force projection and getting those more horizontal angles that are necessary for early acceleration, which are going to transfer greatest to weightlifting. But our resisted sprints that we have in the program, these things are going to be essentially just like an outdoor gym session. This is just power training at its highest. So I think the neurological stimulus that you can get from sprinting and from training in this way, as we've spoken about, things like Franz Bosch, differential learning. If we want someone to move fast, we have to put them in an environment where they can do that, not try and, mimic that or try and always find that in weightlifting or in a specific context. We can bridge the two together by training them separately, and I think you will see transfer over time. And it works this is what I do with my athletes, and it works very well. And we can see how the neurological stimulus, the global stimulus of sprinting, of fast switching the legs, producing large amounts of force, being more powerful and not thinking as much and just being more of a beast, for lack of a better term, can have these potentiation effects, can have these effects in the violent extension of the hips in the snatch or in the dip and drive for a jerk. Understanding, okay, if I want my athlete to have a faster dip and drive in the jerk, they need to know what it feels like to perform a fast eccentric. They need to know what it feels like to contract and relax. And you're going to see that in sprinting, in a very fast exercise where they just, in a jerk, you want them to unlock their knees. If they haven't felt what it's like to move that quickly before, then being more athletic in this context is essential, and essential for strong and slow weightlifters. So here I have an example of a resisted sprint. So this is a heavy resisted sprint. You can load these up to around 40 to 50% plus of your body weight. I'd recommend starting lighter, but the sled is going to help you keep this horizontal projection, which is going to be important for not getting an injury, because when if your sprint journey ends in injury quite early on, that's a bit of a disappointment. It's not really going to result in developing power. But using the resistance, you're able to keep to counterbalance, to keep the torso forward, and you're wanting to see in your own sprint work, in your resisted work, trying to look at the orientation of the torso and the shin and trying to keep those angles aligned as you sequence through the steps out of early acceleration into late acceleration, and just try and focusing on continuously charging, looking to see hip extension, and then looking to see, are you striking that foot underneath the hip or are you striking with the foot in front of the body, and how you can develop that some of those techniques. But those are that's just a brief overview of what you can look for in your resisted options, but essential for developing hip extension, developing big, powerful glutes for weightlifting. And then single effort jumps. These refer to all exercises that don't have a landing and a takeoff, just a takeoff only. So things like your broad jumps, we have in the program a rocker broad jump, a rocker box jump, and you can do these weighted. Weightlifters are the kings of box jumps, and they can jump. My coach Goran has spoken about how they would outperform the basketballers for vertical jump. They'd all be standing there performing a deep squat and jumping up, touching the line, or jumping chest height on a box for reps at the end of a program. I think there's better ways to organize it into the program, but regardless, the raw outputs are there. And if you are not training those raw outputs, I think the box jumps, the broad jumps, these things expose people quite obviously to whether or not they are powerful. If you squat 200 and you only broad jump 2.2 meters, that's an issue. You need to be more explosive. You need to be jumping 2.5, close to 3 meters with a back squat like that. And if you want to be explosive for weightlifting. So I think having those metrics in the program, tracking those over the weeks, phase 2, you have the rocker broad jump, and then just You can manage the severity, the difficulty of landings by manipulating the height of the landing. So the box jump, jumping onto something which reduces the harshness of the landing, or in something like jumping into a sand pit at the end of the outdoor sessions, you can do that as well. And that's going to reduce the harshness of the landing. So I think all of those things are really important when you're integrating that, particularly for athletes who are very strong and can produce high forces, to not injure them, to not expose them to too many difficult variations, especially if you're very new to integrating some kind of jump training in your program, so that you just don't pull up with any itises. We obviously want athletes to be healthy. We don't want to punish them and give them tendinopathies and things like that relatively early in the training. And then while these kind of single effort jumps are not as high a return on investment on stiffness, tissue stiffness, and coordination, compared to something like a true plyometric, where there is a landing and a takeoff and it has a tendon response, so ground contact of less than 0.3, typically. These exercises will help elicit a high intensity due to the lack of skill required to complete them. Pretty much everyone can rock back on a box and lean forward, and that's going to put them in a more aggressive shin angle position. It's going to help them project themselves forward, and it's necessary for teaching athletes how to overcome inertia, how to change direction and produce large amounts of force. Again, you can hopefully see the connections between this and being explosive in a second pull, and I guess exceeding the velocity demands of weightlifting. So hopefully those things are helpful, and you can understand a little bit more about some of the modalities we're using in the training and how we can manage a variety of stresses in the program, and how just with this information you can begin to construct your own programs. If you would like to check out the 8-week program I've developed to develop a more beastly second pull, you're going to be able to check that out in the links below. Thank you guys so much if you've been listening on the S&C Roundtable, helping me articulate my thought process and helping me just kind of go through some of the things that were inside the program that you can delve into yourself and you can find value in. And if you're watching on YouTube, thank you so much. Let me know what you enjoyed the most out of this video. Put it down in the comments below. And if you liked videos like this and you want me to put these on YouTube, that might be something we look at in the future. But look forward to regular uploads of the S&C Roundtable coming soon. We have guests lined up and regular uploads on YouTube. So thank you guys so much, and I will speak to you in the next episode.